Welcome again to the XExamine podcast. Thank you for joining us. Question for you. Does the President of the United States have the legal authority to forgive student loans? The answer may shock you. Now, we're always a fan of the novelty of clickbait, so I couldn't resist on this one. It is a pretty interesting topic because there are two sides to every coin, and in the same fashion, there are two sides to this argument. The essential premises are, for the proponents of this, they would cite that the Higher Education Act of 1965 grants the president an unlimited right to cancel an unlimited amount of student loan debt for an unlimited amount of student loan borrowers via the power of the U.S. Secretary of Education, who is part of the executive branch over which is seen by President Biden. So he would have the power to cancel student loans for borrowers in any amount, dollar amount or student amount, if he decides to act. But then the other side of that coin, they would say he may have the legal authority to forgive student loans, but there's more to the story. It can't just be on his own volition, because only Congress has the power of the purse, and therefore executive action can only be used when it is authorized by Congress. So the executive branch cannot spend money unless it has been appropriated by Congress. So they claim that this situation would be such that the president has the authority to forgive student loans, but it's based on a misreading of the Higher Education Act of 1965. And here we are to cross-examine these statements and see, is it a gray area? Is it black and white? And if it is black and white, would we agree with it? Because a lot of time has passed since 1965. Are things still the same? What do you think about that?
It is a really interesting question. I mean, I'm glad that the way that you brought that up, it's such a basic, we're not even getting into the should or should not questions yet. We're just getting into like, does he even have the authority to do this, and why would he have the authority to do this? And we can go back to a little bit more of those historical examples that, of course, including, um, it because if I remember this correctly, the whole these education acts that were passed in the 60s had to do a lot with Vietnam and like how to distribute um, things from the GI Bill to the participants.
Yes, that's part of what they would say is a misreading. They would say it doesn't apply to everybody who has a student loan. It only applies to people who have received student loans in very specific circumstances from the federal government. And there's also a very interesting use of the word cancel. So they just say cancel in their interpretation of it without actually inspecting it. And you can't just cancel the debt because it's got to be paid by somebody. So in my opinion, it seems like they're robbing Peter to save Paul. That bill just has to be, the bill comes due always, as they say. And it's just, we're transitioning it from the person who took on that debt to some sort of strange diffusion plagued by conundrums.
I gotcha. Well, I wonder if it also has something to do with, I know specifically the what they're proposing, we'll just call it like legislation, even though that may not be executive action. Whatever this specific thing ends up being, will target Pell Grants for the maximum amount of 20,000, and then I think like non-Pell Grant individuals will have 10,000, something like that.
Yes,
So,
I also saw that that information as well. That's correct for the Pell Grant being 20K.
so I wonder if there had to be, through some sort of legal process, they found some sort of, maybe not whole, but some sort of procedure to go about this business of figuring out whose loans to repay and how to repay them and stuff like that. Maybe they can only fall under certain areas of the federal government's jurisdiction. For example, like I don't think um, private loan owners will get this sort of thing, but that's kind of we don't know all that much about this at this point in time.
Yes, that's true. I've also heard whispers in the woods that potentially, not that they're going to even take on this challenge, but the Supreme Court, there is a possibility they would strike this down, saying that it is unconstitutional, probably citing reasons similar to this, that there has to be money appropriated for this before essentially the president can give the final go ahead and the green light to use that money to offset the net balance of their student loans, because I don't really want to say cancel either, because it's not just being canceled. Canceling
Mhm.
just means like you delete it from existence. And I
Right.
doubt that our academia and all their institutions and affiliated institutions are going to be okay with just being told that all that money they thought they were going to get, they're not going to get it. We're just, the government said that they don't have to pay that. They're
Right.
just going to
Right.
like eat that cost.
Yeah. So I think at this point now we should transition into thinking about, well, why is the government even considering this now? And why this move specifically? Like there's a lot of interesting whys for like why this amount, why now, and who is this going to affect and disaffect? So I think like, you know, we do have to take into consideration that this is being done by the political party, which many college educated individuals will identify as. So there is some sort of concern that it could be some sort of like not
Huh.
signaling per se, but like this is a bonus to our supporters, and hopefully because there is like a major um set of elections coming in November, as they do every 2 years for the House and whatnot, then
Huh.
we're in some interesting territory, especially because we also know that the House is going to like tend to flip to the other side. So is this a strange political gesture to the constituents to hopefully retain their vote as we go into November? I mean, if so, that's obviously an abortion of all that we stand for in this country, um, even if it is well intentioned.
It's interesting. It almost sounds like a form of pre-nepotism or some sort of attempting to influence your future base. Hey, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. I heard an argument maybe 2 days ago regarding this, where their perspective was based on the statistics that college graduates over their lifetime earn $1 million, maybe $1 million more than a non-college grad over their entire lifetime. Then we are rewarding those people who will already be set up for success and are already going to reach the finish line with a larger war chest. So, are those really the people that need to receive this benefit? And
Yes.
what else is interesting is it's student loan debt. Like, nobody who has student loan debt, I shouldn't say like a catch-all phrase like no one, but many people who have student loans, it does affect their financial decisions, but they're not going hungry because they have student loans. They just minimize the amount that they pay, or they do something where yes, it's annoying, it's parasitic, it's a just a loss every month for them for many years, but it doesn't really seem like it's having a huge impact. It's not like car loans. So people are getting there's I think there's like 15,000 cars that get repoed every day in the United States now, which is like a shocking number. It's up from before.
Hmm.
And if you do that, you take away someone's car. Like a car payment is always something that people really it eats them if they can't do it. And they're very aware, I'm assuming, or at least most of them are, if they're not paying their car payment, because they know it's only a matter of time before they walk out one morning and their car's been repoed, when the repo people can find it and go take it to recoup some of their costs because you've been delinquent 5, 6, 7 or more times. But when you take away someone's car, they can't go to work. And if we just assume that this person has a job and they make money, we're taking away their tools in order to make money, which would at least give them the opportunity to make that car payment in the first place. So it's kind of like bursting the bubble of this like circle. We're preventing them from completing the circle, whereas the student loans, it seems to be not as impactful. It's not as direct. And also the number of people who have these student loans, as well as people who, like myself, I went to college, I got student loans, and when I got out, I scrimped and saved money in order to pay far more than the minimum amount because I was like, I don't like this debt, I don't like the interest rate percentage, and I lived frugally and paid off all my federal loans far ahead of schedule. And so now I would be asked to not only have, since I worked hard to pay off mine on time, I wouldn't receive the benefit because I don't have that student loan. And I'm also being asked to pay off someone else's. So they essentially, in a simplified argument, they didn't have to work as hard. They get to hold on to that debt. They could buy that extra drink at the gas station or go to get more gourmet coffees every time they went out. They can use the vending machine and buy something that's more expensive than get the value pack, or just like not make those same decisions. And then I also get to pay for theirs as well. So that's a 2-0. That's not even like a, hey, we'll pay for yours as a benefit. It's like I paid for mine and I pay for yours. That doesn't seem fair.
Yes, yes, especially because it's a one-time deal. So it seems even more strange. You know what I mean? Because like out of all the people who have had student loans who are alive, and all the people who would have had student loans, let's say that are in high school now, like they're high school juniors or seniors, and they won't even get this stimulus before they get into college. You know,
Mm.
it's such an odd timing window to be working with for like a fixed lump sum one-time deal. I think personally it's even for someone like me who has student loans. Now I'm within my last 20,000, so you know, coming from like $100,000, I'm almost there. I just had a lot more than some other people. But I've just been diligent about it, and even though I know that this something like this would benefit me, I find it very hard to justify. And in fact, I can't justify it, and I don't think that it should be done. So I'm kind of hoping that the Democrats just sort of played this as a, signaling like, oh, we tried, but maybe they already know if it can be passed or failed. But there's so much legal gray area, as we kind of discussed before, that maybe that's not even true. Maybe we don't even know that it can or cannot be done yet, even from the legal experts. But
It's the
yeah, I mean,
same reason why it's going to be so much easier for the IRS to audit middle and lower income families. It takes so much more person power and resources and extreme knowledge of the system to audit people who have very complicated returns because they've spent millions of dollars and also have the best CPAs and financial advisors to file to save them the most amount of money, that it's costly and prohibitive. It's so much easier. Does the lion go after the strongest in the center of the herd, or do they find the one that's healthy but still, maybe not as fast, maybe the straggler? Like they go after those because it's just more efficient for them. It has a better payoff.
right. And something like this really disturbs the whole economic system as a whole, I would claim, because in particular, like let's look at this idea. So we have the government can only take in taxes from the people. They take in taxes from businesses as well, but eventually everything comes down to the consumer. The consumer is the one who's kind of fronting everything. They're exchanging either their labor or the income that they receive from assets. to pay for other goods and services and keep the economy flowing and whatnot. And every time people are receiving income, that's being taxed. It seems very strange that like we would go ahead and take from all the people who didn't go to college and use their money. So like the people, like the whole reason why we have taxes to begin with is that the people pay taxes because they think they're going to receive something. We're told that like we're able to receive something more using economies of scale or whatever garbage they try to justify it with. You'll receive more back than you put in. It's like, okay, well, first off, that kind of just seems like a lie. But like somehow government has this magic power to calculate out and are better business people than business people. So like right away, like that should be a little off. But at the same time, like even if you were just to look at it as in we're taking from a bunch of people and giving it to a very few people, even if those very few people need it, it kind of disrupts the whole chain of economies because what the signal of having debt is that whatever degree you have is not as profitable because otherwise you would have already paid it off. You wouldn't have debt.
This is all really well said, and you're absolutely right. It seems to be working against a concentration gradient, and it also is allocating these resources to a group that doesn't really seem to be as disenfranchised, or if they are, they're not as disenfranchised as other groups. We could easily think of many other groups who are worse off than having this debt that they're allowed to pay off in monthly installments. So I'm thinking about homeless people, people that don't even have a place to sleep, versus someone who, yeah, they got a place to live, they got food, they got a job, they just have like this extra loan that they also pay off in addition to that they have like 10 years to pay off, maybe more. So I'm not trying to downplay like necessarily the hardships of student loans themselves, other than saying that there are people in situations who are probably more deserving of that money. The $10,000 would make a far bigger difference for people who are on the street, people who have mental health issues, people who are, and maybe we could stack those, and I'm not trying to play victim Olympics either, but they're homeless and a veteran, or they're homeless and they have a drug addiction, they're homeless and they have a mental health issue, or any of these things that introduce additional barriers to re-entry into society, or they have done a service to society and now they are kind of being disregarded, and or at least other people are being selected for the kickball team before them. And I also think, to go back on your other point, just as an add-in, this group who's currently in power could be setting themselves up for success in the way that if the other group takes power come the elections, which they may or may not.
Mhm.
I think everybody's talking about this red wave that's inevitable, but the last few elections have been upsets for both sides for many different reasons, and it seems to be a common occurrence to be shocked by the results of what happens on both sides. And so what they could be doing is, if we stay in power, then it looks awesome because, hey, look, we did this and we're going to continue to do things like this for those who vote for us and put us in power. And then if the so-called Republicans take power, then we can say, oh, well, look, we tried to give you this money, we tried to help out the people who were struggling, but those mean old Republicans, they struck it down because they want you to suffer, and they're not charitable, they're not philanthropic. They want to, I don't know, do this, do that. So they're setting themselves up for failure by making themselves look like good people with this virtue signal, whether it passes or not. And then they kind of hoist that responsibility like a hot potato into the Republicans' hands to see whether they say, if they say yes, it's they're darned if they do, they're darned if they don't. If they do, then they'll be seen as almost it's unequal, or it's not fair that they're doing everything that we just talked about, giving to a specific group of people out of someone else's pocket. Or if they cancel it, then they look like a bad person. Oh, they don't care about education. They don't care about your kids'
Mhm.
education.
Yeah, I think it's actually really important too. I'm going to do this a little bit rapid fire, but going through the extremes on this issue, I think really help kind of cement the logic that's going on behind all of these different system interactions. So what I mean by that
Okay.
is like, okay, let's do free college altogether. What does that look like? Okay, well, you need to figure out which colleges are going to be the ones who are most, willing to receive government money. So you have to create some sort of accreditation system. That already creates a
Yeah.
smaller supply of colleges and universities and creates an increased barrier for new institutions to join the entire economy.
An
So
in
that's
group.
already problematic. Yes. So you're already shortening the supply, and then you're also making it more of like a monopoly, because if it's being kind of treated as some sort of utility, then it's going to have all these other extra things. I mean, we could think of the difference between a college and a high school is pretty stark, not just because high schools have minors and so they have to have, even more rules and regulations and stuff like that to go through in order to have, a protected environment. But colleges themselves would probably also start to adapt these other features that one can get away with in a more less regulated market, because there are alternatives that you can pursue. So that's like, if we go on one end of the extreme, because the whole idea of like getting rid of student loan debt to begin with has to do with trying to maximize your workers' productivity. So like the productivity total inside your economy, the labor per that individual, you're actually trying to incentivize investment. But the problem is that you're already taking away that money from the other people who didn't have this. So the funny thing is that you're taking money away from productive people who could probably better utilize that money, and giving it to unproductive people who still have this debt because they haven't proven in the economy yet that their skills are worthwhile of receiving a return. So
Americans are Americans are so productive that they make so much money and so many goods and services that they can not only distribute them within the US, but also through foreign aid with billions of dollars to many other countries. So there's some strange math going on there with just for how great Americans are at production.
right, and then lastly, to like the train of thought that I was going on before, if then people come back and say it's like, okay, well, why don't you just not tax those people? You just print more money while you have the inflation problem. And then you're also asking the question, if you could just print money to pay off students' loans, why do we have to pay for anything at all? Why not just constantly give free money out all the time? So like we instinctively know that there has to be some sort of balance here, but that that idea of where that balance should lie is highly corrupted by this false idea that somehow we're introducing efficiencies in the system by having taxation, which is simply not true. Because like I said before, you're taking people who are, let's say, legal experts, and these legal experts have to also now be business experts, and then they have to outperform the market in this area. Like the whole logic behind it makes absolutely no sense, because entrepreneurs go out and they take on a lot of risk to go inside the market environment and figure out what works through trial and error. So this idea that everything can just be done top down and reorganized this way is just, it's obviously fallacious, even from like an a priori reasoning standpoint. It's fallacious not only in idea, it's fallacious in practice as well. So I do not think that we should be making college free at all. I think this is a really bad move coming from this pure economic standpoint. And this pure economic standpoint is really important because you would have less student loan debt if you eased up on the regulations and accreditation for new universities. So if it's just a supply and demand problem and people have more opportunity to go elsewhere, then you'll have more competition and prices will lower because people will be eating into their own profits just to make sure that they have cash flow. And so you're going to get better quality that way as well. That's just what happens in market economies. I don't know why it's, if it could work for cars, it could work for people and education.
The cream
I think,
floats to the top.
yeah, I really think that the education system as a whole really needs to be shooken up. And I think a lot of it's going to come from removing those institutions and allowing things to take over in the marketplace. Like there are ideas for institutions that kind of go beyond what a traditional university looks like. Like if you could just get on the job training that also comes with like certifications along the way, then that's better than a college education. That is literally better than a college education. You're getting paid to go to work and learn. So you're getting job experience and the specific knowledge you actually need to succeed in that environment. So I also think, though, that the humanities, which have been largely ignored, and I mean like actual humanities, none of these like studies nonsense that we're seeing constantly, where we're getting strange, very specific like history trivia, and we're not learning the tools how to think critically. So, and that's something that humanities do offer. Like that's where philosophy lives, and philosophy is an incredibly important uh, brand of literature that Americans certainly do not um, bother with, but I would say as a
Yeah,
whole, but like it's important.
it does not seem like we are educating our own children in a wise fashion where they can even operate within the system, let alone solve unique problems and improve the system in which they are being let loose into in a few years. It's really a strange environment that we live in now. I think you're absolutely right on all those points.
There's a weird sort of aversion to failure that has been kind of generating in our culture as of late. So what I mean by that
Mm,
is like failure in the market is incredibly important because it's a necessary signal to tell everyone else like, hey, this structure didn't work. And so everyone else now has that information of like, okay, so you can kind of go back and see what went wrong and kind of troubleshoot from there. So if we constantly have our mistakes forgiven by imposing a cost to everyone else in society, this doesn't seem like the best way forward. In
that
fact, it
sounds
seems very regressive.
it seems like that's exactly what's happened with the proponents of this argument, where they would say the fact that the student can get a federal loan pretty much without any credit checks is one of those things that allows failure to happen. It allows schools who should not otherwise be receiving money to receive a student and 4 years of tuition. And these schools know that, oh, well, the government's going to just approve all these loans as guaranteed income. So we don't really have to deliver high quality content. We don't have to produce the thinkers and the next generation of philosophers and engineers and other educators who are going to directly impact their generation and the following generation. It's just by having a guaranteed federal student loan, we're doing exactly what you talk about, which is we're not letting the free market decide who should succeed and who should fail. So you just keep these kind of zombie inefficiencies integrated into the system.
Right.
There's no spring cleaning, so to speak.
Right. And failure doesn't mean like this person is now completely and utterly destroyed. There are paths back. Like people bounce back from bankruptcy and stuff like that all the time. We are in a very strange debt-based economy. So, they are printing money and that is problematic. But in the
Yes.
short run, we won't be able to just eliminate that system. We can't just turn it off right now.
Failure
Even
just
though I think,
means failure just means change your ways. You're
yes,
right.
yep. those assets will be sold off. Someone else will buy them and use them for a different purpose. So, it is important that we keep these economic systems clean, so to speak, because otherwise, all of the inefficiencies caused by government regulation, even if they're well intentioned, still end up having worse results in our economy because of it.
The machine needs some maintenance.
It does. We have to get all those little gremlins out, those gremlins in Congress.
uh, that's funny. Hey, I just want to do a little shout out to some of the topics that were covered earlier. I got some ideas from two other YouTubers, and I just want to mention them. There's Financial Heresy and Jeremiah Babe. So those are two other YouTubers with interesting ideas from which I elaborated upon some of their ideas tonight. So I just wanted to throw them out there.
And if you want the basics to economics and quick short form videos, check out some of the stuff that Robert Kiyosaki has done, author of Rich Dad Poor Dad. He's pretty
Yeah.
insightful for our times, I would say.
It's a very interesting man who's been through a lot of unique hardships, and because of that, he's somebody who can directly state what he thinks. I know he was a Marine, and part of his experience was through Vietnam, and I believe he was in two different helicopter crashes that he talks about, and that's pretty impressive because usually the first helicopter crash kills you. So to go through two, your perspective is probably interesting and shaped even just by that event alone. And then also being a veteran and coming back and trying to join a workforce, and some of the way that things that are normal in the military are not normal in civilian life. And one of the stories I remember him telling was, I think he worked at some like copier, like a Kinko's type place, and one of his employees was messing up, and he called him an F face, but he didn't use that word. And then he got talked to by his boss, saying like, you can't talk to people like that. And he's like, well, he was being one. And so sometimes we need that kind of almost like a wake up call, and they're also just words, and they weren't followed by any physical violence. So sometimes when people can give it to you straight, it's like, oh, maybe I need to not sugarcoat things or not receive information that's been sugarcoated, where people tell me things are just going to be okay. Like when everything meets the previous definition of a recession, and then I'll mention it again, the person from the New York Times who wrote, it's not a recession, it's just a vibe. It's like, what? So, but hey, that's
yeah. To end this,
I choose to. Yeah, go ahead.
To end this podcast, brutal honesty is honestly way more valuable than a beautiful lie.
Yes, absolutely. If somebody messed up your checkbook, you don't want them to tell you anything except this is the situation, this is what happened, because we have to figure out how to reconcile this and how to move forward. Because I failed, yes, but that's not the end. I failed means I need to change. And to do that, we acquire all the facts, we examine them, we analyze them, figure out your options, and figure out how to best move forward.